And so Jane, I just want to start with you and ask, why are CEO exits on the rise? Why are we seeing these changes? And what we should expect in the long term? What's coming?
Yeah. So our research has found that CEO exits are absolutely on the rise. Since 2020, 400 new CEOs across the Fortune 1000. We expect a CAGR of about 9% per year looking toward the end of quarter four. There are push and pull effects driving exits and new appointments. Activists, an uncertain economy, geopolitical uncertainty. All of that is really forcing the hands of boards to make difficult decisions about bringing in new CEO talent. But very interestingly, there is a pull effect. CEOs, especially in public markets, have intensifying demands, a lot of scrutiny, and some are opting out. And that's due to sort of those demands, but also incredible opportunities that exist outside of public company CEO. In private markets, some are pursuing a career of boards. So there's push and pull driving that statistic. We expect it to continue. But I think what's also on the rise is boards are realizing succession planning is critical, and starting that on day one of a new CEO is absolutely top of mind.
So tell me then, Lynn, when you observe all of these companies coming through NYSE and the changes that are happening and the stats that we understand are very much underway and the trends, what is the best way to prepare a succession plan? What is the record that or what is the strategy that works?
Yeah, so we've seen an increasing amount of companies come to us for help in adding diversity to their boards. We've got a service called the Board Advisory Council, which has grown since I took the helm at NYSE from about 350 diverse candidates to over 750 diverse candidates. And it feels like we're doing a search for a CEO almost every week, but it's not just for adding diversity to their boards. They're now looking to add diversity to their C-suite. And the CFO role or tech is certainly an area we get a lot of interest in at the moment. I firmly believe that a part of the job of a CEO is figuring out his or her own succession plan.
Yeah.
And figuring out his or her own bench.
However uncomfortable that may be.
Yeah, mainly because the way I think about our business, managing it as a team, you get that 1 + 1 = 3 effect, as opposed to just leading through your own perspective. You get a lot of, if you're adding diversity to your own management team and you're leveraging the diversity of your board, you can achieve amazing things, and the returns have been, proven that if you manage in that way, it's a lot different than just managing by sole edict. So I view, part of the job, and part of the job I take very seriously is, okay, who's going to be the person that goes after me? How do I set this business up for success 5 years from now, as opposed to 10 years from now, as opposed to, just today?
What is one thing you're working on right now to achieve that?
Well, one of the things that I constantly look at is I look at not just my own management team, I look at the teams below it, and I pull people who maybe have had experience in one specific area, call it, maybe they're in a control function, maybe they should be running part of a P&L. Or maybe they've run P&L, maybe they should be in a control function, because they're looking at the business from two different lenses. I think having that well-rounded experience is critically important if you want to take your career to the next level.
Gina and Elaine are both nodding along to everything you both have said. Yep. We were talking about tenure before this panel started, and the time to prep, but also the time as the leader of the company and leaving space for the person to come next. Yep. What do you think is the ideal tenure?
Oh gosh, so I think it's really dependent on the company and the industry, but certainly the research has shown, I think pre-pandemic, the tenure was at 10 years for CEOs. Then right before the pandemic, it went down to 5. It's increased slightly right now, as a result, I think, of the stability that was necessary during the pandemic. But over the last year and a half, we're seeing a real rise, as you talked about, Jane, right? And the push-pull effect is real, number one. I think the other thing that is really interesting, and I'm thinking about this, and we talked about this too, from a very optimistic lens, in that it's really hard right now to lead. It's not easy. The environment is so uncertain. Jane, you talked about all of the different various things going on. But what's needed is different today than what was needed yesterday. And so what do I mean by that? Well, you need to be tough, but you need to be empathetic. You need to drive hard for results, but you need to inspire the whole organization. It's a litany of paradoxes that I think women have been operating and having to manage for anyone who's been successful in their career has been dealing with this forever. And so I actually think about it optimistically in that who's better positioned today to lead than women? And so we've got to lean in, we've got to raise our hands, we've got to jump in. Listen, it's tough out there, right? So it's not an easy job, but if you're up for it, I think we have the skill set required to really lead very well in this. And when we talked about tenure, we talked about, 3, 4, 5 years. As a CEO, you're just getting started. Your strategies are just getting underway. You need 7-ish years at least to really have impact, to really leave a legacy. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity right now for new CEOs coming in to really make impact and really make change.
And then I think the other thing is just being honest that no CEO candidate is perfect. So how do you surround that person with the support on their team to be able to thrive in a turnaround or a growth scenario?
I think it's so important. So we're talking really a lot about CEO succession, but it's not just the CEO. It's the entire C-suite, right? That we really need to surround that CEO with incredible talent. And so we should not just be thinking about CEO succession, but really thinking about succession for the entirety of the C-suite. Because number one, they could likely be your next CEO. Number two, if they're not, they need to be really strong, because when you bring a new CEO in, they need support. They need help of an incredible team around them. And so succession planning, or progression, as a very good friend of mine likes to call it, across the C-suite, I think is more important than ever.
Elena, I wonder, there's a larger policy environment, there's a larger cultural context and a reality that we live in, and we've seen the rollback of affirmative action. How can companies like Toast ensure that they maintain a diverse pipeline, nurturing leaders from all backgrounds and all levels of the company, as we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a couple things just to build on what Lynn and Gina have said. CEO succession planning starts years before you think you need it. And it actually starts deeper in the organization than you think. And so that's just one thing I've just observed, even in the boards that I'm on, that we're talking about it for, and our CEOs are obviously in seat and going to be there, but we're talking about, if this were to happen, how would we do that? But to answer your question, when you think about 50% of our population is women, but we know 50% are not in management. So that's one, is really looking at the data and making sure that that's in the discussion, because once you see that, it really opens your eyes. And I think that happens in management as well. And then I think changing the paradigm of what you're looking for is something to consider, because today, when people do searches, there's probably a certain set of criteria you look for that we check that box. Like, they have to have this, and they have to have A, B, and C. It's almost like, when you're looking for your spouse, you're like, okay, I need these 5 things. But in reality, you may change the paradigm of what you're looking for if we really want to change the paradigm of what I just talked about, which is 50% and 50%. If we want really more women in leadership, and more different cultures, people of color in leadership, then you really have to think potentially in unconventional ways to seek out that talent that may not be necessarily obvious and in front of you.
So then, Jane, how do you seek out talent in an unconventional way? Because we know that women CEOs only run, just over 10% of Fortune 500 companies. So how do you increase that number and lift it?
Well, if we look at new CEO appointments, 80% are promoted from within. That will only, I think, continue in the future. So it's really about, to your point, looking at multiple levels in the organization, the next CEO and beyond, and really opening the aperture to different profiles. We're seeing a shift from general management to more CFOs becoming CEOs. We're also seeing CHROs be put into succession plans. With all of the supply chain crises, operationally driven executives are also being considered. And it's really up to both the CEO, the board, and increasingly the chief people officer getting involved in the development of the internal candidates through assessment and coaching, exposure to the board, analysts, investors, putting them in the right business rotations, and ideally supporting women to seek external board positions. So identification, opening the aperture to different profiles, and then really proactively, many years ahead, providing a really robust plan to get them there.
Jolene, can I just add
Please.
something? Because I think it's
Yes.
really interesting. So if we're really going to be looking at changing the dynamic of women at the top roles, to the point, we've got to start looking deep. But there's research out there, I think it's Women CEOs Speak, and it's very, very clear that the women CEOs who are successful, the attributes and characteristics are noticeable and tellable by ages 28 to 32. 28 to 32.
That's
so
early.
That's early. So if you are really looking at potential, right, and then investing early, as you said, succession planning, you can't wait for the succession moment.
No.
You've got to be planning the whole time.
Right.
It's got to be your normal business practices, your day in day as a board, as a CEO.
Agree.
To work on this. But if you're looking at the potential of your leaders lower in the organization early on and investing in developing them, that's when we will have, and we will hopefully stop having the argument that there's no pipeline of talented women.
Yeah.
Right.
No, there will be pipeline of talented women. We just need to invest in them early on.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just to build off of what you were saying, there are people in this room that are part of this pipeline. So when you say there's characteristics, this is for all of you, what are some of the characteristics that you identify early on in that stage between, say, the late 20s, 30s, 40s of a possible succession candidate?
Well, one of the things that I look for is cultural fit. I mean, if I think about a company has two real pieces of IP. Its people is one. Its patent portfolio is the other. Clearly, you're investing. You got amazing patents. That's one thing. But people is clearly one area. And in order to be a good leader of a business, a good leader of a company, you need to be able to harness the power of your people and have them all moving in the same direction.
Yeah.
So someone who really shows the attributes of the culture that has been built in the organization is one of those things that I tend to look for. Not necessarily someone who is just about, I'm ready to raise my hand and do whatever the case may be, because a lot of people raises their hands. Are they able to raise their hand and do it in the way that this company is moving forward?
I think also agility is something that has come up a lot.
Agility.
Yeah, just someone who can, especially in this dynamic environment, right? Companies, management teams have to be agile in this environment. And so someone who has that tone in how they operate, or someone you've given an assignment to and they've done really well that maybe wasn't conventional. And you see that, and then you can continue to, they're almost like athletes, right? They're not necessarily profiled for one type of function, but they can really expand their breadth of experience. And that's actually something I look for when I hire is, do I want someone who's deep or do I want someone who's a general manager? And more often I would probably go for the general manager, because then I can use them in other capacities and give them those stretch assignments. So that agility, I think, especially in this environment, has been really important,
I think
and will always be important, whether we're in a different macro backdrop or the current one. It's just a skill that I think every CEO will need.
I think that's right. The other thing I would add to that is the ability to execute today, but at the same time transform for tomorrow and look to the future, right? You've got to be able to.
It's a tall order.
Yeah, I know.
To have that agility
as
and
I
be the
said,
athlete
as
as
I
well.
said, it's not easy,
Yeah.
right? But I think the ability to run the train while you're fixing the tracks at the same time is something in this day and age that is more relevant than ever, and why I think it's harder than ever. But again, investing early in developing people to do different things and not just see control, but see control and have P&L responsibility, come at it from different lenses, really enables that development.
Yeah, it's what is really exciting and increasingly exciting about the CEO role, because you can drive so much short-term impact through the block and tackle, but as long as you don't get caught up in it and you can think really forward, the shareholder value creation and long-term impact to culture and business, there's such huge opportunity. So there's a theme of optimism, even though the challenges are great.